In a wing of the New York World's Fair in 1930, one scene captivated the public. A Hopi woman with side-roll hairstyle and ritual attire presented her twin babies. There, the exhibit on indigenous peoples used motherhood and clothing to display daily practices and affirm Hopi identity, an invitation to look beyond exoticism. In the final years of the 19th century, at the Umatilla Reservation in Oregon, emerges Rattlesnake Pete. Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla face changes. Federal policies, missionaries, and markets knock at the door. While negotiating adaptations, rituals remain alive, even as the agency imposed schools and restricted lands. From this tension, his story arises. In 1885, Ben Whittick photographed Sergeant Jim, White Mountain Apache scout. The portrait reveals how scouts acted in U.S. Army campaigns in the Southwest. They guided columns, translated, and negotiated with villages. Over time, the image became a reference for research on indigenous leadership and the frontier at the end of the Apache Wars. In New Mexico in 1900, Native women from various peoples carried their pots to local markets. There, it was sustenance and tradition. They shaped the clay, polished, painted, and fired it in open bonfires, following inherited techniques. The pieces circulated as utensils and trade currency, strengthening community networks and ties with settlers. New Mexico, 1930s. In an open field on the dry plateau, Navajo riders compete in an ancestral game. The horse, center of economy and status, guides each move. Around them, families watch, alliances are strengthened, and handling techniques pass from generation to generation, marking the rhythm of the community's festive calendar. In the early years of the 20th century, Geronimo Chiricahua Apache chief endured captivity as a prisoner of war at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, since the 1886 surrender. Still, the memories of his raids against U.S. and Mexican forces continued to shape his fame, consolidating him as a symbol of indigenous resistance and strategic leadership. In 1925, Santa Fe, New Mexico hosted the Feast, a musical gathering that brought together city audiences and indigenous peoples. In the records, a singer of Cherokee origin stands out before an attentive public, performing traditional songs and recent works. The night opened dialogue between worlds and established the feast as an annual celebration of culture. In 1900, photographer Carl Wertens recorded the daughter of Chief 𝗢𝗍𝗄cie White River Apache leader in Arizona. In the portrait, clothing, posture, and adornments stand out, connecting the young woman to the leader's lineage. The framing presents the person and situates her family's place in the village's social organization. It reveals power, memory, and continuity. In 1890, in Montana, appears the record of Eddie Gray, son of White Elk, a presence among the northern Cheyenne. His name crosses lineages and rituals. Around him, federal assimilation policies and the Dawes Act pressed on lands and customs, while westward expansion advanced and narrowed this people's space. A story of continuity under pressure. In 1899, F.A. Reinhardt photographed Good Eagle, Wanblee Waste, of the Oglala Lakota. The portrait, made at the end of the 19th century, was part of an effort to record Plains peoples under strong U.S. state pressure. By situating his subtribe among the 7 Lakota divisions, the image raises questions about that people's place in history and the present. Joseph White Bull, Dakota warrior and chief, grew up in the shadow of his uncle Sitting Bull. Born around 1849 and 1876 in the Little Bighorn Valley, he entered history. By his own account and by Sioux memory, he was the one who struck down Colonel Custer. Later, he faced life on the reservations. He lived and passed away in 1947 at age 98. Two Sticks, or 𝗓𝗄𝗎, led the Lakota on the Great Plains. A member of the 𝗢𝗍𝗄cie, the Sioux Confederation of Collegial Leadership, he took part in diplomatic and military decisions. In battle against the UTEs, he earned the name Nomkapa, knocks down two, by toppling 2 horses with a single blow of a war club. He is remembered to this day. Last Horse, Oglala Lakota leader, roamed the plains at the end of the 19th century. After years of resisting settler expansion, he surrendered to the Army in 1899, among the last. Sent to a reservation, he lived under Indigenous confinement and died in 1909. His trajectory marks the closing of the Plains Wars. It is the passage from one world to another. A Cherokee woman holds her baby in her lap. We are in Oklahoma, the forced destination of so many families after the removals of the 19th century. The photo, from the 1920s, emerges amid the government's assimilationist pressure. In a changing country, the portrait captures the tension between erasure and collective memory as communities redraw bonds to move forward. This photograph presents a Cayuse native known as Dr. Whirlwind, Charlie Saplish, and 𝗙𝗪𝗪𝗪. A member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla, he lived on the Umatilla Reservation in Oregon. The record is by Lee Morehouse, active in the early 20th century, who documented Native practices and leadership. The image echoes a time of change. In the image, Mrs. 𝗢𝗱𝗱 Lakota acts as an interpreter among the Sioux. The portrait is from 1891, when, after the Indian Wars and under confinement policies, the Sioux lived on reservations. In this scenario of political and cultural change, she bridged tribal leaders and federal agents, enabling agreements and direct listening. A Blackfoot woman in a fur coat and felt hat holds in her lap a child equally bundled, who looks at the camera with serene curiosity. The portrait, taken in the late 1880s by Ross Alexander, records a bond and at the same time marks a period of change in cultural assimilation policies among Indigenous peoples. Nettie Morris, young Nez Perce, appears in 1900 in Lapwai, Idaho. She wears a light, long dress with embroidery, fringes, and a beaded necklace. Her hair, in 2 braids, rests on her shoulders. The portrait suggests calm. She belongs to a people of the Pacific Northwest, heirs of the Plateau culture, then targeted by assimilation policies of that period. In 1910, Chief Tlingit Anatlas, Anyalahash, on the Pacific Northwest coast, appears in a photo with a Chilkat blanket. Woven with mountain goat wool and yellow cedar fiber, the robe displays graphic designs and sacred animals. In feasts and dances, wearing it declared status, leadership, and living tradition, a symbol of Tlingit authority. In 1901, in Ravalli, Montana, Duncan MacDonald appears alongside his wife, Mary Agnes. The portrait by N.A. Forsyth is not just a record, it is part of a project to document Indigenous peoples. Son of a Scottish trader and a Flathead woman, MacDonald led, defended rights, and worked to preserve his people's memory. 2 Apache women pose in front of a wickiup built in arid Arizona, near a spring. The photograph by Noah H. Rose is not just a portrait, it is part of the impulse to record Indigenous ways of life, work, and movement while the U.S. advanced westward and tensions grew with federal authorities and processes of territorial control. A brief scene on the Western Plains, late 19th century. A white man and a Cheyenne shake hands. The gesture suggests the post-Civil War period. Around them, Cheyennes and Arapahoes, allies of the Sioux, faced military advance, land occupation, and the slaughter of the buffalo that sustained them. The handshake contrasts with the struggle for survival. In 1916, H.C. Tibbets recorded a young Apache woman in the arid U.S. Southwest. On her head, she balances a woven olla basket used to store water gathered from seasonal rivers and wells. The image reveals the daily routine of water supply and the role of women in villages in a period of intense ethnographic research. In 1873, a team tasked with measuring and mapping the U.S. West crosses the landscape pulling a travois, an A-frame structure dragging instruments and supplies. The record is by William Henry Jackson, Yellowstone photographer and member of the government's geological and geographical expeditions. The image exposes the logistics and effort behind exploration. In 1870, the studio reveals 𝗢𝗪𝗪 Whitehorse of the Pawnee Nation. 2 years earlier, he had joined the Hayden expedition to Yellowstone. He also acted as guide and Army ally in Plains campaigns. The lens is by William Henry Jackson, Civil War veteran and pioneer in photographing the West. 𝗢𝗹𝗱 was born in 1911 of the Comanche people, a Uto-Aztecan language group that dominated the southern plains in the 18th and 19th centuries. He lived in Oklahoma, then Indian Territory after removal policies. There, settlers and the U.S. Army advanced. His trajectory crosses forced changes and constant clashes. The date of his death does not appear in the records. 𝗲𝗍𝗍, young Hopi of 𝗢𝗨, Arizona, faces the camera of John Hillers in federal expeditions. Hands on lap, dressed in her people's attire. Behind her, a textile with geometric patterns. The portrait is part of the series that mapped Hopi daily life and architecture at the end of the 19th century, opening a window into this collective memory. Stay with us. In 1905, Edward S. Curtis recorded Geronimo, the Apache leader who symbolized resistance to U.S. expansion. In the portrait, he appears serious, wearing a hat and scarf with a rifle in his hands. The photo is part of the North American Indian, Curtis's documentary project with more than 40,000 images dedicated to Native peoples, an effort to preserve histories and portraits.